Hello, welcome to Movers, Shakers, Designers, Makers. My name is Steve Carpenter. I'm Dean of the College of Arts and Architecture, and today I'm talking with Dr. David Gall. David earned his PhD at Penn State in art education in 1996. In the spring of last year, Dr. Gall was selected by the art education program to be a recipient of the Arts and Architecture Alumni Award. Unfortunately, like so many things this past year, COVID-19 forced us to postpone the campus visit that we hope to celebrate with David and other recipients. But, we're planning to bring Dr. Gall and other Alumni Award recipients to Penn State later in fall of 21 to receive the award and to meet some students and faculty personally. In the meantime, this conversation is a welcome chance for me to introduce you to him. Welcome, Dr. Gall.
Thank you. Well, I cannot tell you how pleased I am, first of all, to get the award and to be honored by my colleagues, because that's what it is. But coming from Penn State, it's pretty special for me as well. So, thanks for that, and especially, of course, with you as the person there as the dean, because we have, I was at Penn State when you were there, a little ahead of me, and that makes the connection even sort of like better and more sort of like, heartwarming, to put it mildly.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is heartwarming. I tell you, it seems like forever, and it seems like just yesterday we were in grad school together here at Penn State. So it's fantastic to be able to sit down and chat with you like this, David. Thank you. So look, David, your current position now, you're associate professor and area coordinator of art education at University of North Carolina in Charlotte. If you would, could you share just a little bit of your earlier educational background with us? And also in that, where does your interest in art education come from?
Yeah, well, it's great teachers, I think, and from high school, because we didn't really have in Barbados at that time growing up, which is like pretty long ago.
Hey, David, I catch myself saying back in the 1900s.
Yeah, well, I don't want to give away my age or anything like that. I'm a young guy still, but I like to.
But really, it was back in the 1900s, right?
Yes, 1900s. Yes,
1900s. That's what I said. Yeah.
Yeah. So my art teacher in high school, we have middle and high school combined in Barbados. A kind of British system is there, like, and he just caught me because I was a gifted student, but I was really in the science stream. And he caught me one day and he said, like, what are you doing with your talent? So I actually did art at lunch, because we have a proper lunch period in Barbados, not like in the US where you get half an hour or something.
Mhm.
We have like an hour for lunch. And I just would go in. He said, I couldn't disappoint this person to me.
Mhm.
That was my thing. I said, like, how is this man is interested in me, and I don't even know why he's so interested. And that was it. I just got into. I did all these certificates for art, graduated with what you might call a baccalaureate or the AP kind of thing, because I went right through to the highest level. And then once I graduated from school, my principal, you would say, here we say head teacher, he stopped me one day and said, just before I was going out to look for jobs, he said, like, go, would you like to come and help Mr. Boothagen? That was my teacher. I said, like, of course. Well, So I taught art and English to the middle schoolers and art to the middle schoolers, because he said he needed help. Now, I wasn't teacher trained, but of course, at that time, there wasn't a lot of teacher training in Barbados at that time. But so that's how my teaching started, really.
Is that something?
And within 3 years of being on that staff and faculty, I decided, well, if I want to do this, I got to get a scholarship, because I can't afford, and I was from a basically low income family in Barbados, and your parents can't really afford to send you anywhere. So it has to be a scholarship or something like that.
Mhm.
I applied for I was looking west. I wasn't looking east at all. I applied for scholarships to Canada, and something fell through there. I won't go into that story. That's an interesting story in itself. And I just got the India government one came around, and I got it to India. Um, lo and behold, I get the scholarship to Bharati University, which was founded by Rabindranath Tagore, the first Nobel Prize laureate for poetry, non-Western. When I'm applying for this India government scholarship, and boy, but again, whoever was in India, that sort of like they decided where I should go. So I ended up, I didn't choose this institution.
Oh, you didn't. So you applied to go to university
Yeah,
in India.
I just applied for the scholarship, and when they asked me like which university, I had put down Madras College of Art. And they sent me to Tagore's institution, which was actually because they knew like it was really a place where a lot of foreign students went for like philosophy and stuff like that. Because at that time it was very well known for doing like Asian philosophy as well,
I see.
So, and for art, it was actually very well known for its visual art department. So then, I did my master's in India as well. Because I got another scholarship in India, and I studied in western part of India this time in Baroda. Wonderful, again, one of my professors, in fact, my mentor I majored in painting, and my mentor, he was my guide in painting, the main professor, as it were. He was a graduate from Shantiniketan, from Tagore's University.
Is that right?
And he's one of the most knowledgeable. He's dead now, but he was one of the most knowledgeable persons about art I've met anywhere. His name was KG Subramanian. A lot of written about him in India, because he was not only a good artist, he was a thinker, about teaching, about culture. So it was just wonderful to have him as a mentor during my master's, and then I went back to Barbados to teach.
Okay. So was your mentor? I'm trying to put together the where your interest in art education comes from. You mentioned earlier you were working as an educator for the middle schoolers,
Yeah.
but it seems to me that those subjects weren't art. And then later, when you're undergraduate and graduate degree in India, you're doing art and learning philosophy.
Yeah.
When does the art education piece happen?
Well, in middle school, I taught art and language arts.
Oh, you
right?
did? Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
But I knew when I knew that I would go back to Barbados to teach, because you're not going to make money being an artist that easily in the Caribbean and in a small island like that. And so I knew I would become a teacher. But it really blossomed as when I taught it. When I got back to Barbados, I taught at the same high school. My old high school wanted a teacher. So my good fortune was there. My teacher was retiring, and there he was coming back right in time to like teach at that school. And they were just happy to gobble me up, as it were, But I spent like 12 years there, and then I got the job at the community college. And the Fulbright came like the next year, and I just applied because we were all teacher trained by then. I had done my teacher training at the University of the West Indies, and they were planning to do art ed, because that's what I was teaching at the community college. We were the only people that had qualified art educators and artists. Good. University didn't have an art program, and so that's when the government then had decided that, look, we want to really establish art ed at the community college, but we would like it to go up to a degree level. And so that's how, I guess part of the reason why I came out to do the PhD.
So I'm interested in how it seems like when you applied for scholarship to India, the right institution was selected for you. You have this Fulbright, and you come to Penn State. we were students here together.
Mhm.
I've stayed in touch with you over the years, watched your career. I'm convinced Penn State was the right selection for
Oh,
you as well.
I
Talk to me about your experience as a doctoral student at Penn State.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, I sometimes have chills because I'm saying like, you didn't. What did you do? I didn't do anything. You know, people say you're blessed, and I don't like those terms, but yes, in a way, yeah. I along the way I have been pretty fortunate. And when I got to Penn State, 1993, and my beloved went off to India because to do her master's with our kids, and I was there. Um, Wonderful. I don't know what Penn State is now. I mean, I'm sure it's still wonderful. But I can say, like, to me, the faculty was so together, the art ed faculty, and that's always precious to me when you have professors who are great human beings. You just need good human beings. They don't have to be all like brilliant or anything. They just have to be wonderful, good, and pretty competent in what they're doing. And Penn State was that for me. And of course my colleagues, yourself. I mean, I think I had again a wonderful set of colleagues at the same time. That helps a lot when you. I remember some of my classes, and there were some MA students in the class. Professor Ambergy is in my mind right now. Pat Ambergy.
Patricia Ambergy, that's right.
Ambergy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my God. And this was the other thing. It was winter. I went in fall, and my very first winter like that. I had never.
Okay, wait. Let's underscore this. You come from Barbados. You've
Yes.
been in India, but you come from Barbados, and you go to State College.
Yes.
And you're talking about the first winter.
The first, I mean, like real winter. I mean, like India has winter too, but you can put on a shawl and a sweat, a sort of woolen sweater, and you'll be good. At least in that part, in Shantiniketan, where it was. It was chilly, but Penn State was, and that year, 1993, it was a lot of snow, and I had to walk to Dr. Ambergy's class. I walked from. I can't remember. It's up there. My dorm was up by the Nittany Lion. Can't remember.
Oh, we were in Chambers Building at that point.
Yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And the dorm was there, and I could you could walk quickly to to her class. When it hit November and so on, I mean, like, I'm saying to myself, like, boy, this is a good thing. I had a wonderful roommate, Irish American, who suited me out. He was a nice guy. He was doing engineering. And Henry took me, because I didn't have a car. And Henry took me, and he got me ski gloves. He said, "You're gonna need these." He said, "You don't need these ordinary things. You're gonna need ski gloves." And he was right. And he said, "Don't go without them." And anyway, but my entire experience at Penn State was outside of art ed, which there were Caribbean students there,
Mm-hmm.
and there were Caribbean professors who had Caribbean background. So they would often, there was a Professor Lee, I think he was in meteorology, and we would be, it was like his place was the place that we gathered, because he was that kind of, and of course, it's just good to have, that kind of community as well. And then, of course, there used to be Caribbean night. I don't know if you.
I don't remember that. No.
Yeah, well, the foreign.
Maybe you didn't invite me to Caribbean night.
I can't remember, but this was like the most fantastic. My only regret was that you could not, because they would bring, we had a party as it were, but they would bring like musicians, and a band, and you just have a party, and you have Caribbean food and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But my only regret was like, where did America get this law that you should end a party at 2:00? I mean, like, this is like, what is this? How does a party end at 2:00? I mean, this is not. So, but I had to live with that, you know. So
You had to get used to the cold, and ending part is at 2 in the morning.
at 2 in the morning.
I get it. I get it. Oh man, I'm wondering if you could comment on what does philosophy mean for the teaching of art or
Well,
art teachers?
I think what I think I try to, especially when, you know, your philosophy can seem to be up in the air, you know,
Mhm,
stratosphere sort of thing.
mhm,
Um, and especially with visual art, I think one of my things is like, you know, it allows you to understand the structure of what you're doing better, um, and the practice of what you're doing better, and you can teach better when you it it once you can be disabused of the idea that philosophy is out there
mhm,
beyond you, and rather see it in very sort of basic things sometimes that you're doing, then you realize how much it is involved in what you are doing. You know, it
mhm.
isn't this remote thing that people assume it, and it can be remote if you're reading something, and that's legitimate in its own way, you know. But it's also, and I think that's something that India has done very well. India has a wonderful lot of little stories that package philosophical things very neatly, you know, and they're just homely little stories that you know that will do it for you. And to me, that's an example itself of how you can bring philosophy is in simple things. You know, it's just like how you can turn it on, how you can just turn on that light that lets people see it as there, you know, right there with them. You know,
Yeah, I like that. Philosophy is in simple things, but it's a matter of
yeah.
accessing that. I like that. You were just talking about this idea of structures, and I'm thinking about structures not necessarily of physical human constructs as structures, but there are structures that humans put in place, institutional structures, cultural practices, social practices. And you know, we're sitting here talking in February of 2021, uh, almost about a year since the world had to make a pretty big shift in response to COVID. Um, and you know, uh, we've had to learn about wearing masks and being physically distant, but there are other elements of our daily lives that have become more visible and more public. What I'm talking about is the current cultural, political, social circumstances that are either emerging from or making more, for me, more visible certain structural practices. I'm talking about structural racism. I'm talking about various modes, hierarchical structures that within societies and cultures. Can you speak a bit about current political and social circumstances that you've witnessed over the past year?
Well, you know, probably we should say over the past 4 years, but
Well,
yeah, well, I tell you why I say that, you know, and it's interesting how things impact you, whether you like them or not. When I wrote the introduction to this book that I got published, you know, you have to, my publisher was at that time, you have to get peer reviewed and, you know, and so on. It was peer reviewed, approved, you know, and you know, you make your vision. But I had written in the introduction that at that time it was like 2016. The introduction was written around 2016.
oh, I see.
So,
So
so
you wrote the introduction 2016, but it was published in 2019. So
yeah, because it had to go through all manner of,
yeah, so some things happened between those
yeah,
two
something
dates,
happened.
is what you're talking about.
There was
Okay.
a lot of interesting little things that happened.
Yeah.
And so by the time I, you know, sometimes, you know, getting the peer review or what, all that took time in many cases. Um, and so the time came for it to be published, and I think there was a hiccup then, and I have to thank my editor because he like was determined to make sure it was published. Um, I suspect somebody got offended because I almost didn't get it published. Because
Really?
in my introduction, I had written like fascism was on the rise globally. in 2016, and that this is a serious problem for education. And I think it is. So to tie that in with and so I had to revise my introduction a bit, because you need to get your book published, So I made some adjustments, and anyhow, so it was published. And that to me, like what happened in the past year, both, as you have pointed out, the pandemic, COVID, and then I think our president-elect, Henry Rowling.
Oh, James.
James, yeah,
James Rowling, yeah.
Hayward. James Hayward, yes, he's James Hayward, I think. James wrote an article, but we invited him to do a talk for our students here. And he called it something with two pandemics. And one pandemic was, of course, the racial issue. What has flared up so strongly, which you said has become more visible, is racism and white supremacy and the legacy it has in the US. And that even more, makes me think like, wow, we need more than ever in terms as educators to really try to resist that, to resist in the sense like through education, to really make people understand like this idea that you're a world unto yourself, or that somehow other people are not people, that is such a profound mistake. And from whatever philosophy, I mean, there's nothing to really justify that except, I would call it sort of extreme conceit of identity and self, which is bound to be violent, because if you think that nobody else is like you, or everybody's beholden to you for their existence almost, then you're going to be, that's a violence in itself. And we have to and the arts, I think, and the visual arts can place, because remember, a lot of these things are subtly done visually. There's an article I share with my students by Elizabeth Dela Cruz in one of my courses. The Native American mascot, something, I can't remember the name of it now, but she looks at this, it's published in the Art Ed sort of like little magazine.
The journal.
The journal, yeah. And I use it, some things are not dated for me, This is such a good article on how Native American mascots and so on with football and, all this thing, and how pejorative it is to the people. And a good article for students to get an idea of how visually a lot of this thing is transmitted, and that's part of our visual culture that we need to address, how you can stigmatize people subtly, because it's usually very subtle, through visual codes, through things like that. And it's, I mean, that's one of the good things about the visual culture movement, is that it drew attention to these things. Whatever its shortcomings may be in other ways, that was one of the powerful things. But I always, in a sense, had, and again, I go back to Shantiniketan or to India, and my professor in my master's, who for him is like, why are they now talking about this? Because for him, he used to talk about things, and he saw things as a cultural continuum like that. That like there wasn't like folk things influenced top. All that was already all going on there. And he said, the more we can understand this, the better. So here we were, with visual culture making us aware of that, these subtle ways in which these things seep into your subconscious, really, and shape what you think of yourself sometimes. All the time almost.
It's interesting because you've taken us back to your studies in India, and then you go back to Barbados, and as you're talking, I'm thinking, this is that Gombrich example that you've been talking about, right? So where you're pointing out there. I mean, there are subtle examples. There are things that just kind of get passed along without calling them into question, without calling them out. Right. Without critiquing them, they become perpetuated. So it seems to me this has just been a framework that you've used uh, throughout your career. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that you've had to adapt your teaching, or you mentioned earlier collaboration being a key point of how faculty members work together. Can you talk about some adaptations you've had to make over the past year with teaching and collaborating, and even with art making?
Yeah. Well, my art making now is my PowerPoints and everything. And I truly think of it in those terms, honestly. For me, there's no like, when I make an image for my students, it's always something that is visually going to try and make them think certain ways. Even when, and of course, with a PowerPoint or digital presentation, you always have words. So, for me, I don't bother with those distinctions like fine art, etc. anymore. How am I communicating when I make a visual image? I do have some plans for some studio work, but honestly, writing writing has taken up my time more. With COVID, everybody's research time was impacted, certainly here. I mean, we all had to go online, so that was a big shift. Um, uh, so with our limited, I have another colleague, faculty member, and that other person. So we managed the ship and we work together to do things, make sure that our students get the guidance that they need. But shifting online has taught me that, hey, there may be some good ways in which you can now use this. Because I'd like to be in a studio with my students in my art ed space. It's still one of the better. I still think that what I think we'll have to realize is the importance of physical contact. It's still very important. I think art, visual art, all the arts, but certainly one of the wonderful things about visual art, and this is a profoundly spiritual thing for me, is like, when you are lost in art making, you shut off that chatter of a lot of things. You're still thinking, but it's like such a mind-body kind of relationship that is going on there. And that's why to me, it's not, and it gets the ego, I would call it. One of the greatest obstacles to any development is our ego, whatever it may be, whether we are understanding something or not. Usually what's in the way is our egos. And art making, that happens a lot. When you think you know what you're doing, and then the clay tells you, like, actually, no, stupid, this is
That's not it at all.
The material, this dumb material tells you, think again. I think that
it refuses, it becomes stubborn.
And we think, and to me, that dialogue with material, with inarticulate material, quote unquote inarticulate, because it really is now, because it's telling us stuff, and that it should be humbling to any artist worth his salt. So that to me is something I think more and more now. You're telling students, look, don't worry if you do have to teach online, but think of it as another medium that you have to manipulate to get your point across. But hopefully we'll be back in studios, because truly there are disadvantages to just being online. We know that. Virtuality cannot compensate completely for actual physical presence.
Absolutely.
That's and for touch, because I think one of the things, even with visual art, is that I put the hierarchy of the eye above the hands, is because I was like thinking, and the hands are like unconscious, like, give me a break. That's a hierarchy that we shouldn't have, in fact, because the hands teach you a whole heap of things too that the eyes could not. When they're touching that material or feeling that brush on canvas or whatever it is, those require different kind of thinking processes to just rational thinking, I would call it. It's almost, I actually think aesthetic, I have to critique some of my colleagues here. I think when we think of, use the term aesthetic to mean superficial, we have missed the boat. It really should mean integral. That it is more, it's reason, it is feeling, it is your whole being presenting an idea.
So are you saying there's been some misuse or some misdirection with the use of the term aesthetics. It becomes flattened and easy. It's actually more
More
complex
complex than
space.
that.
Yeah,
Terry Eagle. I don't know if you've ever read this guy, Terry Eagleton.
Terry Eagleton. Mm-hmm.
Yep, fantastic. The ideology of the aesthetic. You know, some books that stay with you. You know, it's beautifully written. You know, but and not that he would say this himself, but it made me think certain ways. And the guy mentioned Roy Buskar. You know, and more for me, it's like, no, you know, when we say like, when we use the term aesthetic to mean superficial or trite, when we tell people like, oh, you're just interested in the aesthetic aspect of something, that's really to diminish aesthetics in a way, you know. But it has been it's part of the currency of the language that we have inherited. And we have to like change that in the way. And I think it's important for visual artists and all artist teachers to change that. We have to stop using it that way. But, you know, only time will do that, really, you know. But that's one of the things you're not imposing your ideas on students, but when you're with them, you're throwing out that little suspicion and doubt about, hey, is that the only way you should be using this? Or think about this for a moment, you know, because our job is not, we can't anyhow impose our ideas on others, you know, they will just resist them anyway. But you can have a conversation, a dialogue, and that will hopefully change thinking, you know, and art can do that very powerfully in some ways, I think.
I
I don't
think
know.
you're right. Yeah, you've used I've heard you more than once today say artist, teacher, but I think you also add philosopher, artist, teacher, philosopher
Yeah,
is what I'm hearing in what you've just shared.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I every time I think about you know, getting back to studio, because I still like have projects that I would like to do. They have at least visual art projects, as it were. There's one actually, I have it right there. It's laid out, you know. You remember Tamir Rice?
Yes, yeah, I remember when he was
This
killed.
is like something for me that is seared into my memory. A child playing with a gun is shot in 2 seconds almost. And when I saw the videos, you know, you can see them on YouTube or whatever, this boy playing by himself like any other child. And what system facilitates this execution? This erasure of this boy in like a few seconds. And so I want to do a work on that, which connects with all of that has been happening. You know, that the visibility that you've been talking about, much more visible now because of technology. You know, you can take a video with your phone, so now you can record any atrocity as it were, as it is happening.
Right.
And that's visual too. That's one of the interesting things about the visual, that technology has allowed what used to be like realistic drawing. Just imagine this thing called the camera and digital technology, click, and it's there. But it now allows you to like record things that you couldn't have in the past, you know, and that's a plus side of those things, I would say, and we have to think about that and how we use them, you know.
No, I would agree. I would agree with you, and certainly you've led us to this place where one could be pessimistic. You know, using the technology. What did you say, to record atrocities? But perhaps the technology could record the higher achievements or possibilities for humans. So, what makes you hopeful about the future? You know, we've talked about quite a bit about your past, but let's look to the future. What makes you hopeful about the
Oh,
future?
I think, well, Again, I have to put this past election makes me. I mean, when the majority of people say no to certain things, that is a wonderful sign. There's no doubt. And I have other reasons for thinking the way I do, but I think humanity is at heart very good. The universe is good. It's love, really. Who can do without? I mean, like this idea of existing by yourself and that the world exists for you is it's you would have to think about it a little to realize how ridiculous it is. you know. Um, but I just imagine you cannot even think without food coming from someplace else, and we have faith in the fact that somebody over there has baked the bread and that somebody, when you realize how much faith and trust you have to have in other human beings, you wonder why is it that you would think that somehow there should be demeaned by some process? Like why would you think that? And the only reason you can think that is if you're an extreme narcissist. you know, you can only think that, if I call it the conceit of, and this is to me a problem with modernism. I call it the conceit of difference.
The conceit of difference.
Yeah, my difference. That difference itself has my difference makes me almost like a self-created thing, when in fact a little reflection would show like you actually did not create yourself. You came out of a womb, for God's sake. Tons of people have been there before you to make sure that you were there. To think that this little thing, exists without others is such it's just narcissism incarnate. And then so that to me is gives me hope, because I think more people realize that than do not. Even the people who think that way, like what they do, they form a group. So they have their group of like-minded people.
Yeah.
And so you have to say, like, so what are you trying to say? What is this idea that you can somehow exist on your own? Which is it's one of those fictions that I think gets perpetuated.
So the hopeful piece would be, you're hopeful that we're coming to a space perhaps where people are being more critically reflective and realizing that we're connected to each other, we're dependent upon each other, we don't create ourselves. Together we create possibilities.
Yeah, I was watching a guy. He's a person who knows the Constitution. He's one of these constitutional scholars, and he said, there's a part of the American Constitution that it is about individual liberties, but it is about the good of all. There's a line in there that is about the good of all. That's not talked about enough. And that's it. You cannot think. I think what is hopeful is that there are more people who are like that than that are not, really. And that is, despite the fact that it seems to be, especially in the past few years, and this is all over the world actually, that those forces seem to be in ascendant. I think it's more like, when stuff that is bad has to come to the surface so you can see it and deal with it. You have to sometimes, because a lot of people went along thinking that this is not there. They were pretty happy. I mean, I think people of color in the US, Black population in the US, have known for a long time that racism was there. Like, this is not news to certain communities. In fact, they're exhausted with having to say this is the case, this is the case. And art and so on, I think we just have to sort of make the push to be more global, because it's not only the US. We really live in a globe. The climate thing has shown that we live in a global world. Everything that is done somewhere else impacts your own locale. You know,
right.
we cannot think anymore that we can do without collaborating with each other for each other's good. Um, what more religious message? And that to me is like, yeah, you don't have to be a religious you don't even have to believe in God to understand that. You know, you could be an atheist and understand that. You know, and do what you should do. You know, so it isn't about religious faith in that sense. It's just like realizing what a human being, what a good creature is. You know, because I don't want to be anthropocentric. Human beings can be pretty in fact, our conceit has caused a lot of these global problems.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and not to go into a post-humanist conversation, but certainly I heard your adjustment from person to creature. You're talking about our relationship with other beings and other, other living entities. Think back again to David when he was leaving Barbados, coming to Penn State to start his doctoral studies. What advice would you give to David Gall as he's beginning his doctoral studies in art education?
Boy, I maybe just have faith in people and yourself. And that has seen me through. I mean, I probably would. That's what I was when I came. But it has stood the test of time for me. And be just a good human being and relate to human being to the people that you meet as like people. My roommate, clear of white Irish American. They're you're not going to have agreement about everything. But it was just like, if you can have a conversation with a person, you can change. You can learn from them, and they can learn from you. And that was that, because I learned things from him. And conversate, that willingness to have a dialogue with others, should be there. And that was, to me, what kept me on track in Penn State for my doctoral thing. I think that's why we said that. Just and be fearless in the sense that you don't know what you're getting into, but that's all right. None of us know what we're getting into. I mean, just trust that you can deal with it.
That sounds right to me. So would David have listened to that advice you just shared?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think I go back to my mom for that. Really, my mother was like super sensitive lady. I mean, like, gosh, this is a woman with basically an elementary education, but she was like she was such a good judge of situations and character. She was the last of 7. And they all came to her for all of our siblings tended she was like the anchor, so, and that was my, for me, she wasn't like an anchor too, but a very spiritual person for me, that without religion being it, with just like a sensitivity about things that was unusual. And, I think that's where a lot of my stuff comes from.
Fantastic. Listen, David, I just have a few finishing questions here. Just read a question to you, and it's kind of rapid fire. No need to elaborate necessarily, but here's a question. Here's the answer. You ready? And these are all Penn State related questions.
Sure.
All right. So what is your favorite flavor of Penn State Creamery ice cream?
Oh my goodness. I liked rum and raisin, but it wasn't all year round.
Okay. Rum raisin as a seasonal dessert. Okay, I got it. What is your favorite spot or building on campus?
Wow, I can't. It used to be. I can't remember the building, but it's wherever we had that same party, that area.
The party you didn't invite me to?
I didn't invite you to. I will not be allowed to forget this. I can't remember. It was this is it was really where people could those students can have a community like kind of thing.
Was that the hub
Yes.
building? At the hub. Okay, we'll take the hub. You've mentioned a number of people here at Penn State who were influential. Was there one particular person of influence during your time at Penn State?
I think Yvonne, honestly, and yourself, honestly. My yeah, no, my those are the two because we were often, in touch with each other a lot.
Mhm.
And you introduced me a lot to a lot of others as well. But Yvonne, to me, is, in terms of my mentors, yeah,
Mhm.
she was great.
Yvonne Gedalius, absolutely, she's great.
Yeah.
Final question. If you had to pick a moment or an experience from your time at Penn State that stands out above all others, what would that be?
Wow. When I would say, like, I walked into Amberly's class. It's interesting who I'm remembering. And, I just was struck by how calm that's the experience I remember one in teaching in terms of that's like, yeah, this lady she's like in control of stuff, she's so easy in terms of a subject, her relationship. That to me was like, I felt impressed by her the moment, within a few minutes, I just said like, wow, I gotta listen to this lady. you know, So for me, that was one really that is memorable, actually. It sounds strange, but yeah.
No, it doesn't sound strange. That memorable moments
Mhm.
are profound.
Is she still?
No, Patricia retired a number of years ago.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
Good. So
Listen, David, it has been so great to talk to you. We over the years we bump into each other at conferences. We stayed in touch by email, telephone, but sitting down with you today, it's like no time has passed. It's so great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time out to do this, and congratulations on being a recipient of the Alumni Award.
thank you very much. It's been an honor and a pleasure, really.